Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to the class of Comedy of Manners. This course is designed for BS English Semester 6. The course code is ENGL3124 and I am Sumaya Abid. Today we are going to discuss one of the very important and major plays by Henrik Ibsen, that is Hedda Gabler, and the topic that we are going to deal with in particular is Hedda Gabler as a modern tragedy. So before we proceed, let's have a quick overview or an idea what Hedda Gabler is about. Hedda Gabler, as the name indicates, is the name of the main character around whom the story evolves and revolves. The story deals with a woman who belongs to an elite class. She is an unconventional heroine. She commits suicide when she cannot meet the aesthetic standards she has set for her life. So not only Hedda Gabler, the character is unconventional. In fact, the tragedy, the genre, the play by Ibsen is also an unconventional tragedy. It is one of the plays by Henrik Ibsen that is quite different in form and nature as compared to his other plays. So before we formally begin the topic based on Hedda Gabler, let's talk about the genre of tragedy itself. We start with the basic question, what is tragedy? So why this topic is important and what we have to look for in the topic is that tragedy as a genre need to be understood. Whenever we deal with the topic, we try to start with the basic information about that topic. So we start usually with the definition of the term that we are going to deal with. So why here tragedy itself is important, why we are going to look for the definition of tragedy? The reason being that the tragedy has been changed and it has completed its historical journey over the passage of time. If we start from the classical tragedy, that is mainly to say, if we talk about the tragedies of Aeschylus, Sophocles and Euripides, the classical, and then we move to Shakespearean era, Elizabethan era mainly, and then we move to towards modern tragedy. We see that tragedy has seen many phases and it has undergone dramatic changes. So let's begin with what is tragedy. I have taken 2 to 3 definitions at random from different websites and dictionary, so we can have a general idea of what tragedy is. I know you are familiar with this genre and the definition, but why we are working it like this, let's have a look. So the very first definition is that tragedy is a branch of drama that treats in a serious and dignified style the sorrowful or terrible events encountered or caused by a heroic individual. So this definition is from Encyclopedia Britannica. Keep in mind 2 or 3 important words that I'm going to give you through these definitions. The very first one being, in this definition, the word serious and sorrowful. The next definition is from literarydevices.net, and it says that tragedy is a type of drama that presents a serious subject matter about human suffering and corresponding terrible events in a dignified manner. So tragedy is a type of drama. The second word, the first one was a word was serious, the second word is drama. So it is a type of drama, means it is a particular genre. And the third definition is a dramatic composition, often in verse, dealing with a serious, a somber theme, typically involving a great person destined to experience downfall or utter destruction, as through a character flaw or conflict with some overpowering force as fate or an unyielding society. So here the word that I would like you to focus on is the word great person. So in the previous definition, I asked you to look for the word serious. In the second, I asked you to look for the word drama, and then the third one is a great person. So if we look at these definitions, we reach the conclusion that historically speaking, tragedy has played two important roles. One is the self-definition of a civilization, and it has been used to make a genre distinction. So here what is important is the second point, that is tragedy as a genre. So we are going to deal with two aspects of tragedy in this lecture. The very first one is the tragic impact, the tragic effect, and the second one is the genre itself. So whenever we are starting any topic and we are dealing with any particular subject, we need to start from basic information. So we are going to start with we are going to look at the etymology. So why etymology is important, and why it is important to look back or consult the classical models always. The reason being that we are studying modern literature, we are studying a modern drama, and how it has taken its present form is actually the result of the classical form. So whenever we are looking at the classical definition, the purpose is that we try to understand the points of departure. I would like you to keep in mind the word points of departure. Points of departure is a term that is that shows that how much journey a particular genre has gone through in order to take its current form. So if we talk about the genre tragedy, its origin goes back to Greek drama. The two words that make the word tragedy are tragos and oidi. Tragos is goat and oidi is odd, that is song. So if we combine, the word becomes goat song. That gives an idea that drama has taken its, historically speaking, the drama has taken its origin from Bacchanalian celebration. Bacchanalian, that is Dionysian festival that Greeks used to celebrate. Okay, so whenever we are the tragedy, if we look at the definition of tragedy, and if we talk about Dionysian festival, you are already familiar with the classical works of Sophocles, and with your reading of Antigone, as well as Oedipus Rex by Sophocles. The two other important writers are Aeschylus and Euripides. So when we are talking about classical drama, the very important criticism that we have is the one that was presented by Aristotle through his book Poetics. That is considered the classical book of criticism on the genre of tragedy in particular, and on epic in general. So Aristotle gives the definition of tragedy as, he says, tragedy is an imitation of the word that Aristotle used in Poetics for imitation is mimesis. So tragedy is an imitation of an action that is serious, complete, and of a certain magnitude. And the purpose of the tragedy is to arouse the feelings of pity and fear, affecting the proper purgation that he calls catharsis of these emotions. So here I have omitted 6 important components that he talks about, like plot, character, diction, spectacle, etc. So because you are already familiar with them, I just want to take the basic idea about the tragedy that Aristotle talks about in poetics. So tragedy is an imitation. First of all, it's an imitation, and it is serious, and it has a certain magnitude. Then he also gives an idea of the tragic hero, a person, he says, a person who must evoke a sense of pity and fear in the audience. He is considered a man of misfortune that comes to him through error of judgment. While talking about tragic hero, he also clarifies that the hero or the main character is the one who moves from prosperity to misfortune. So it's a person who, because of some error of judgment, causes his own downfall. So one important thing that we have seen in Aristotle's definition of tragedy is the element of seriousness, that it is something that is serious and it has its emotional impact. The second one being the character, the main character, the tragic hero himself, and what causes the tragedy. So if we keep in mind the two words, the seriousness as well as the tragic hero, the main character himself, we will be able to understand Hedda Gabler. Okay, so if we sum up the important elements that Aristotle talks about, we see the basic characteristics of a tragic hero in poetics as you can see on the screen. So why we are talking about Aristotle's definition, and we know that we are dealing with a modern drama. We need to see that how far we have moved. Again and again, I'll be emphasizing this point, that you have to keep in mind that you have to study the modern drama, but you have to look and keep in mind the classical drama as well, so that when you have things in comparison, it gives better understanding. So there are things that Hedda Gabler shares, Hedda Gabler the play shares with the classical drama, and there are points of departure that Hedda Gabler certainly shows. So the very first element, hamartia, that is a tragic flaw that causes the downfall of a hero. This is what Aristotle says, that always there is this hamartia, the tragic flaw. And as you know, that Aristotle, according to Aristotle, the best play that exemplify all the points that he deals with in poetics are being exemplified by the play Oedipus Rex by Sophocles. Then the second one is hubris, that is excessive pride and disrespect for the natural order of things. Then peripeteia, the reversal of fate that the hero experiences. Then anagnorisis, that is a moment in time when hero makes an important discovery in the story. So hamartia is the tragic flaw, hubris is excessive pride, peripeteia is the reversal of fate, anagnorisis is discovery. Nemesis is the punishment that the protagonist cannot avoid, usually occurring as a result of his hubris, and this is where the tragedy lies. And the final point is catharsis, that is ultimately the end purpose of any tragedy, that arouses the feeling of pity and fear in audience, and they feel for the inevitable downfall of the protagonist. So if we have the classical definition in mind, we are able to see and analyze the Elizabethan tragedy as well as modern tragedy in a better way. So here we have a very quick, brief, very sort of precise comparison between classical tragedy and Elizabethan tragedy as well as modern tragedy. So just I'm focusing only on the main points, though there are a number of similarities as well as the differences that we can look for, but I'm going to deal with a few points because we have to move to the play itself. Okay, in classical tragedy we see that the main character, the hero, is of high status, as Aristotle says that he is a noble man. In classical drama we see that in Elizabethan drama we see that the man is also a noble man, and he belongs to he belongs to the higher status of the society. If we talk about Aristotle's time, we talk about classical tragedy, we see the stories of kings like Agamemnon. We see the story of the royal princess like Antigone. We see Oedipus, who is again a king. If we talk about Elizabethan tragedy, and if we talk about Shakespeare in particular, we see that he was greatly inspired by classical literature, and most importantly the Roman tragedy. So here again in Elizabethan drama we see the particular class, that is kings and queens. But if we talk about modern tragedy, the major change that comes is the focus is no more god and goddesses. It is no more the story of a king and a queen or prince and a princess. Rather, it's a story of a common man. And and if we talk about classical tragedy, we see that the reason of tragedy is the tragic flaw, and a very important component in terms of structure is the presence of chorus in classical drama, that is to some extent in a modified form is present in Renaissance tragedy or the Elizabethan tragedy, but it completely disappears in modern tragedy. So we see that in classical tragedy, the main reason of tragedy, the downfall, is the tragic flaw, the error of judgment. But in Elizabethan tragedy, we see that the personality trait is the reason of downfall. If we talk about Hamlet, this is his indice, and if we talk about King Lear, it is his anger. If we talk about another playwright, Christopher Marlowe, we see that the downfall of the downfall of Dr. Faustus is because of his ambition. So there is one dominating trait that causes the downfall. And if we talk about modern tragedy, we see that if we talk about Ibsen in particular, we see that the tragedy occurs because of a conflict between an individual and society. There is no role that is shown to be played by fate or fortune. If you talk about classical tragedy, the chorus or the choral part is the one that defines the major structure of a drama. In Elizabethan tragedy, we generally see, not only in tragedy but also in comedies. I have the general pattern is that the Elizabethan tragedy is, or Elizabethan drama is, a 5-act play. But if we talk about modern tragedy, we see that the modern tragedy does not follow this traditional division of a play in acts. It has its own division. We have 1-act plays, we have 3-act plays, we have 4-act plays, like we have Hedda Gabler, that is a 4-act play. In classical tragedy, the chorus, there are lots of number of people who form the chorus. In Elizabethan tragedy, even there is huge dramatis persona. Dramatis persona is the cast, the characters. But in modern tragedy, we see that there are fewer characters. And if we talk about modern tragedy, we see that it is mainly a domestic tragedy. So in classical tragedy, the palace that was presented, like the palace of Oedipus Rex, then the palace that was presented in Hamlet in Elizabethan tragedy, or in King Lear, they have all vanished, and it has been confined to a drawing room. That is the domestic setting in modern drama. So we start with Hedda Gabler as an Aristotelian tragedy. We see, and I have listed here very few points simply because Hedda Gabler can be put in comparison with Aristotelian definition of tragedy, but you can also negate it. So here we see that it can be a research topic for you being students, that Hedda Gabler can be seen as an Aristotelian tragedy, and it can simply be rejected as a complete departure from Aristotelian tragedy. So few similarity being that Hedda is also of noble birth. She is, as Aristotle himself says, that the hero must not need to be entirely virtuous. So is Hedda. She is very much the woman of the real world, not all good nor very bad, but the one who has both parts, being good and being bad. And peripetia, that is to say the reversal, that comes in the form of Loveberg's death, because she is expecting one thing, but Loveberg's death turns out to be a mere accident rather than a suicide. And if we talk about differences, that is that it's not exactly hamartia, the tragic error that governs Hedda Gabler's life, and the important thing being that in modern tragedy we fail usually to place the reason, that why and what is actually the reason of the tragedy. No anagnorisis, the correct pronunciation of the word is anagnorisis. Okay, so no discovery, and not we do not see Hedda Gabler moving from prosperity to misfortune. So we keep in mind Aristotelian idea of tragedy, but we also need to see how far we have traveled over the centuries. So if you keep in mind 2-3 plays like Oedipus Rex from classical, King Lear in Elizabethan tragedy, and then Hedda Gabler from modern drama, you will be able to see the journey that the form of drama and the structure of drama has taken. Okay, and now we are going to move toward a very important section of the lecture, that is Hedda Gabler as a modern tragedy. But we are going to analyze the concept of tragedy and Hedda Gabler as a tragedy, as Raymond Williams discusses in his book Modern Tragedy. And students keep this reference in mind, because this is one of the very important book. If you really want to understand what modern tragedy is, then Raymond Williams' book Modern Tragedy is the one for you. So in second chapter of the book, he talks about Ibsen's methodology, or Ibsen's method of dramatization, and he calls Ibsen's drama the liberal tragedy. He says that at the center of liberal tragedy is a single situation. So liberal tragedy, liberal being a liberal, who would be liberator and who would be liberal in the play, obviously it would be protagonist. So he talks about liberal tragedy. What is Ibsen's liberal tragedy? He says that at the center of liberal tragedy is a single situation, that of a man at the height of his power and the limits of his strength. Keep in mind two words: height of his powers and the limits of his strength, both paradox, at once aspiring and being defeated. So one individual is constantly struggling, but at the same time being defeated. And what are those factors we need to understand? And if we talk about Ibsen, this is mainly society that comes in clash with an individual, releasing and destroyed by his own energies. So like classical, like Elizabethan, it is one's own energies that causes one's downfall. The structure is liberal in its emphasis on surpassing individual, and tragic in its ultimate recognition of defeat or the limits of victory. Limits of the victory means victory is not achieved, and that is why the tragic effect is created in Ibsen. What we must trace finally is the transformation of the tragic hero into the tragic victim, and this is probably the most important line as far as Williams' criticism of Ibsen is concerned. He says that in Ibsen we find the transformation of the tragic hero, that is Aristotle's hero, into the tragic victim, that is Hedda Gabler, or the characters like Nora from A Doll's House, another play by Ibsen. So here again, Raymond William, he talk about the classical Renaissance, or that is Elizabethan and modern tragedy. In a sequence, he says that classic in that tragedy for us has been mainly the conflict between an individual and the forces that destroy him. If we talk about Agamemnon by Aeschylus, if we talk about Oedipus Rex, the trilogy by Sophocles, and if we talk about Medea by Euripides, we see that an individual who is constantly in conflict with the forces that are the external, or they can be internal forces that destroy him. Then Elizabethan tragedy, we see that by the time of Marlowe and Shakespeare, the structure we now know was being actively shaped. An individual man, from his own aspirations, from his own nature, set out on an action that led him to tragedy. And again, the references to the personal traits that I have already discussed that cause one's tragedy. If we talk about modern, then we see that the noble people, the concept of the gods and goddesses and the people from royalty, it has all been replaced by rank. That is, that it all has been replaced by class. Rank, that is to say, became class, and once it did so, a new definition of tragedy was inevitable. So the very important thing, that from classical to modern, how we shift, that we move from the noble man to a common man. And then Raymond William, he talks about Henrik Ibsen. He calls him Ibsen the social critic, Ibsen the romantic, Ibsen the existentialist. And there are a few other terms that are used for Henrik Ibsen, that is Ibsen the feminist, Ibsen the modernist. So Ibsen's most important contribution, and for which his plays are well known, is his social criticism. And in his social criticism, it is the society that is important, because it is society that comes in clash with an individual. So if we talk about Ibsen the modernist, because we are talking about modern tragedy, we find the humanist exploration of the unknown reaches of life. That is, the bourgeoisie's preoccupation with the humanitarian and with money. Bourgeois is refers to the middle class. So it is the middle class that is coming to the prominence and taking center is taking the position of center stage. In modern drama, the romantic intensities of alienation, remorse, and perverted desires, all are subjective emotions that are associated with the modern psychology. And it is here it is also important to see that modern tragedy is more psychological in form as compared to the previous drama. The social recognition of dead institutions and limiting beliefs. Dead institutions can refer to the institution of love, institution of religion, institution of marriage itself. All these are present in Ibsen. All these elements, the above mentioned elements, they are all present in Ibsen, William says, but in active combination, not as separate influences. This is important to see that how all these forces, and one thing that you'll notice, that everything that he talks about, it belongs to society. So all these factors work in active combination in Ibsen. But the real interest lies where the work lies, in the struggle of these forces and in their composition into a particular drama. So how Ibsen turns these clashes, these forces into a drama, is actually what gives form to Ibsen's tragedy. What is Ibsen's view of society? How Ibsen perceives the society he depicts in his tragedy? Ibsen creates again and again in his play, with an extraordinary richness of details, false relationships, a false society, a false condition of man. This falsehood is important, one of the major and very important motive in almost 80% of his plays. The immediate lie The motif of falsehood and lie, that is telling lie, is almost always present as a symptom of a general condition. Characteristically, for liberal tragedy, the fight against the lie is individual. A man fights for his own life. This immediate lie that we see in A Doll's House by Ibsen, where Nora is living a lie. And here again in Hedda Gabler, we see that how Hedda Gabler is herself is living a lie, that how she is trying to live in a false relationship with her husband, but she ultimately fails in that. And why and how the tragic impact in Hedda Gabler is created is through the tragic deadlock. Deadlock is the one where there is no way out, and the tragic hero is trapped in a particular situation from which only death can liberate that character. So Raymond Williams here further says, what happens again and again in Ibsen is that the hero defines an opposing world. And when he says hero, it is a general term for both hero and heroine. Is that the hero defines an opposing world because his or her personal world is different from the world one aspires, that is full of lies and compromises and dead positions, only to find as he struggles against it that as a man he belongs to this world and has its destructive inheritance in himself. Ibsen turned this way and that, looking for a way out of this tragic deadlock, but normally he returned to it and confessed its terrible power. So like G.B. Shaw, we see that or for any other playwright, we see that Ibsen is the one for whom art is something that is a sort of an exploration to find a way, to find a solution. So through the tragic deadlock that usually human beings are caught in daily or routine life, Henrik Ibsen turns the things this way and that in order to find the way out of this deadlock. But when the characters like Hedda Gabler fail to find the way, the ultimate result is the tragic death. The individual, that is the main character, fulfilling himself, absolutely becomes or offers himself as the liberator. So the one who is suffering will ultimately be the liberator, who will trying to be free or being liberal from that situation. The individual struggle is seen as both necessary and tragic. And here is a quotation from one of the plays by Henrik Ibsen. The name of the play is When We Dead Awake, and he says, a tight place where you stick fast, there is no going forward or backward. And here we see Hedda Gabler clearly caught in such situation. The conviction of guilt and of necessary retribution is as strong as ever it was when imposed by an external design. So this external design again is a society that traps and crushes an individual and his or her individuality. For there is no way out, there is only an inevitable tragic consciousness. This is a quotation from another play by Ibsen, that is Ghosts. And here is a quotation from the play Ghosts. Ghosts, I almost believe we are all ghosts, Pastor Manders. It is not only what we have inherited from our fathers and mothers that walks in us, it is every kind of dead idea, lifeless old beliefs and so on. They are not alive, but they cling to us for all that, and we can never rid ourselves of them. Whenever I read a newspaper, I seem to see ghosts trailing between the lines. There must be ghosts the whole country. And the second quotation is, and then we are all of us so wretchedly afraid of the lies. So the modern society, the worldview, or the one given in Hedda Gabler, or the world that as perceived by Ibsen is the one that is ghost, and where the people walking are like the people walking like ghosts, like in another play When We Dead Awaken. Another important aspect, a struggle that the tragic hero, the heroine, attempts as a final attempt is the aspiration to light, and what is the result? This position, so often stated, is not a gloss for surrender to the darkness, the cry for light. This is what we see in Hedda Gabler, a constant desire for achievement, for aesthetic value, for something to have beautiful in life. The desire to climb out of such a world is persistent and emphatic. There is no turning away from life to death, no tragic resignation. Ibsen's heroes characteristically die fighting and struggling and climbing. The aspiration to light is confirmed, not contradicted. So here Raymond Williams is saying that the aspiration of the characters towards light is confirmed through their death, which is and this aspiration is not contradicted, means their death confirms that they have moved towards something higher in the form of death by their deaths. In this sense, they are all heroes, but also they are tragic heroes. So we see in elements of modern tragedy in Hedda Gabler that it is not a conventional 5-act play. It is a 4-act play where Act 1 begins or starts with morning, and it Act 4 ends on evening. That is obviously completes the journey of Hedda's life from morning to evening, symbolizing life to death. Here Act 2 is written mistakenly. This is Act 4. A woman holds the center stage, and this is something that is the modern element, and this is we see that it is not Hamlet, it is not Julius Caesar, it is not King Lear, it is not Dr. Faustus, it is Hedda Gabler, a woman who holds the center stage. So she is the heroine who is a rebel as well. So we have many rebels in literature over the time. We have Medea by Euripides, and we have Miss Julie by August Strindberg, and again this is another woman who is unconventional and a rebel. Society is being presented as an antagonist. So society, with all its socio-economic factors, plays an important role in characters' tragedy. And again, the psychological realism. Since it's a modern drama, the psychological element is never absent. It is actually because of this psychological element that we really fail at times to find the Hedda's reasons of being dissatisfied with her life. If as far as the tragic hero is concerned, we in modern tragedy, through this play, we get this opportunity to move from tragic hero to tragic heroine, because as you know that Ibsen is also known as the feminist. So we have a tragic heroine in the form of Hedda Gabler, who is a noble lady who belongs to an elite class. And the tragic reason, the reason of her downfall is not a tragic flaw, it is the unbridled desires to gain power. She says, I want for once in my life to have power to mold a human destiny. And this is not an ordinary desire to it is a superhuman desire, and that is why Hedda Gabler at times is considered superhuman, not just a human, an ordinary human. So we see that Hedda is not a victim of fate. She enjoys relations with men but does not want to be controlled. Wherever she feels like, she enjoys the relation with them because she likes them, she admires them. She is more of a manly spirit than of a womanly, because she is more of her father's daughter, as Ibsen says, than her husband's wife. Here I have shown put an image and of the plot diagram of the play, as it is a non-traditional 4-act play. We see the few elements actually conform to the traditional form, that is exposition, rising action, climax, and the falling action. We see in the first act that Hedda is miserable, and we find that she is in trouble with characters like Anjul, like the maid, and then we see that Hedda burns the script, and finally George, knows that the script is being burned, and finally Hedda kills herself. So if we see that it mainly, the plot or the structure mainly covers the journey of single character Hedda, who in relation with other characters. Here one by one I'm going to trace a few elements, or let's have a look what caused actually Hedda's tragedy. Act 1, Hedda and Tesman are back from honeymoon. We see, yes, but we also find that it is an unhappy marriage, as Hedda is completely dissatisfied with her marriage. Lovberg is back in town, who poses a threat to Tesman, being a rival. But again, we see that this man is certainly is going to play an important role in Hedda's life, or probably he had played an important role in Hedda's past. Act 2. Act 2, we see Brack hints that after children, Hedda will be occupied with them, to which Hedda clearly retorts that she cannot bear anything that makes a claim on her freedom. So here we get an insight into the character of Hedda, that she cannot even allow children to pose a restriction to her freedom. And if we talk about Hedda Gabler, and if we put her in comparison with Nora of Doll's House by Ibsen, we see that it is by the end of the play that Nora comes to realization that she has more noble duty, that is towards her own self, than towards her husband and children. We see that this is a woman who is already emancipated. Hedda is more concerned with her own self, as many men in society are. Her quest for freedom from the burdens of being a wife and a mother. So she cannot allow anything that makes claim on her freedom, be it the role of a wife or a mother. So it is also the reason that she breaks up with Lovberg, because she cannot allow to be controlled by anyone. Act 3, we see that she is the one who is quite an influential person, and she very easily influences Lovberg, and she also feels alarmed and threatened when she feels like controlled by Brack. And Act 3 is the one where we find the climax of the play, when Hedda burns the manuscript of Lovberg's second book, which he calls the child, his child. So it's like killing the child. It also shows or gives the technique that is being used is that of foreshadowing. Again, a very important technique being used in modern drama. Killing the link between Lovberg and Thea. So actually, by burning the book, she is actually breaking the link between Lovberg and Thea, which she probably is jealous of. In Act 4, we see that she is disgusted by Tesman when she tells him that she has burned the manuscript, and he feels happy that how much Hedda has felt and how far she has gone for his love. But she is disgusted by Tesman's happiness. She is also disgusted by Lovberg's death when she hears that how he died. She wanted him to die beautifully, but he did not die the way she has thought of. And she is mainly afraid of scandal. And since she's afraid of scandal, it gives an insight that being though she's playing with pistols in the beginning of by the end of Act 1, and she is the daughter of a general, she is more of a manly nature. But again, we see that somewhere down in the heart, if we go for the psychological realism, we find that she's afraid of scandal, and this scandal has to do with society. So again, the society is antagonist, the one that is unseen monster that is there to make an individual feel afraid. So here I have selected few quotations from Act 1, 2, 3 and 4 that give a quick glimpse into the character of Hedda. Act 1, these impulses come over me all of a sudden and I just can't resist them. So impulses, she's an impulsive person, and probably this is the result of an impulse, that how she commits suicide by the end of Act 4. Act 2, oh courage, oh yes, if only one had that, then life might be livable in spite of everything. Courage. So courage is something that is actually lacking in Hedda, and she is afraid of the society. In Act 3, she says, Eilert Lovborg, listen to me. Will you not try to do it beautifully? She is actually idealizing or romanticizing Lovborg's death, that he should die in a particular manner, and that would be the beautiful way of dying. And Act 4, and probably when she's suggesting this to Lovborg, she's actually thinking of her own death. Act 4, everything I touch seemed destined to run into something mean and farcical, means life is meaningless for Hedda. Now, what insight we get into this character, Hedda Gabler, the character? We see that there is willfulness. There is, she has her own way of doing things and thinking about things. Lying is one of her traits. She can lie, as she lies to Lovborg, that and she and if not lying exactly, she actually conceals the truth, that she has the manuscript with her. She is concealing, obviously. She has this destructive nature that she can easily manipulate she can easily manipulate others. We also find her mocking Aunt Julie when she is making fun of her hat in the beginning, right in this, probably in the center of Act 1. And obviously she seems to be seducing, something that we find in relation between Hedda and Judge Brack. And obviously she has the pushy ways, that how she forces, or she makes Lovborg to have drink and to convince him to commit suicide. So Hedda Gabler, if she is the way she is, we see that she is, after all, the product of the society. And what sort of a world is that Hedda Gabler is living in? We find people who are lovesick, like George Desmond, who is obviously lovesick for his wife. Hypocrisy we find in the characters, again in the form of George Desmond, who probably shows two faces to Lovborg. He is jealous of him, but at the same time he is hiding his disgust. We see people manipulating each other. There are people who are drunk. Drunkenness again is a problem, and there are people suffering from unrequited love, unfulfilled love in the form of Lovborg. And obviously the social insecurity, because of which Hedda Gabler marries George Desmond. And last but not the least is the point, that is idle rich, that it is Hedda Gabler particularly who is rich but at the same time idle. This boredom is the one that is killing Hedda Gabler. I have here taken. Okay, here is an very interesting image that you can see on screen. That is a page from Ibsen's dramatic technique, and we see that it is a statistical table of asides, staged whispers, monologues, and thinking aloud in Ibsen's plays. And it is a complete chart, and it is very, very helpful if you are analyzing and if you are reading some other plays by Ibsen as well. I have highlighted or encircled the one that deals with Hedda Gabler. So we see that there are no asides in Hedda Gabler, but there are stage whispers that are 17 in number. That is quite a huge number, 17 stage whispers. So the society that we were talking about in the previous slide, we see is the one that is suffering, that is in gossiping, the one that has its ailment, the one that is repressing. And we see that there are three monologues, and there is no thinking aloud as we usually find in the form of Iago's speeches. So it also this chart is important in the sense that it gives you an idea how the modern drama is different from typical Elizabethan drama. So in modern tragedy, we can see that there are less asides and thinking aloud that we usually find in Elizabethan tragedy. Okay, what is Hedda's concept of freedom? After analyzing and after going through some important personality traits of Hedda, let's have a look of Hedda's concept of freedom. We see that Hedda feels motherhood as burden. And when Hedda's relation with Lovberg becomes too serious, she breaks off and threatens to shoot. She says, he said that when they parted, she threatened to shoot him with a pistol. This is Mrs. Elstead telling Hedda that about Lovberg, that he said that when they parted, she threatened to shoot him with a pistol. So she is the one who cannot be controlled by anyone. So she has rejected her love, and she has she has actually rejected her motherhood as well, as we come to know by the end of Act 4 when she commits suicide. She does not want to be controlled by Bragg even. So this actually proves the final trigger for her suicide, as she feels under control of Judge Bragg. So what we see through Hedda's aspiration towards light, her emancipation, her idea of independence and freedom, that she is not an unconventional heroine. She has a strong desire for love. She says, oh, don't use that stick. She has a strong distaste for love. She says, oh, don't use that sticky word. About motherhood, she says, I have no leaning towards such things, Mr. Bragg. And in that sense, to some extent, as far as being an unconventional heroine is concerned, she is to some extent like Euripides' Medea and August Strindberg, who is famous for his naturalism, and Miss Julie. Is one of his plays that is the text mainly based on naturalism. So Miss Julie, the characters like Miss Julie, Medea, and Hedda Gabler are the characters that cannot be forgotten easily as far as literature or the reading of literature is concerned. And but what mainly dominates, or what actually governs much of Hedda's action is a deep fear of scandal. She breaks off with Lovebird simply because she was afraid of scandal. She learns that Mrs. Elstead has left her own husband. She says, then you have left your home for good and all, and then you did it so openly. But what do you think people will say about you, Thea? So she is again, while questioning Thea about what people would say, is actually imagining what people might say about her. So she is the one who at one time is one seeking freedom and so bold, but at another time she is completely in fear of society, and her actions are restricted simply because she is afraid of the societal pressures. Even Hedda admits her fear at times when she says, that shows how frightened I am of scandal. And when Lovebird says, and he very rightly points out, that he says, yes, Hedda, you are a coward at heart. So we find that the complete journey of this character that is completed when Judge Bragg says about Hedda's suicide, that good God, people don't do such things. That people certainly say that they can do this, but they cannot go this far as to commit suicide as Hedda did. Okay, we see that Hedda is in complex relation with characters. So the people are those who form the society. So when we say that a character, an individual is in conflict with the society, we actually say that people that the individual is in conflict with the representative of society, that are people surrounding a person. So we see the maid who thinks that Hedda is very difficult to please, she's a difficult woman, and Julie, she Hedda shows rude behavior towards her. She is we see that there is no they are not in a compatible relationship. And Mrs. Elstead, as far as she's concerned, she is easily manipulated by Hedda, and she appears to be a foil, a complete contrast to Hedda. As far as Judge Brack is concerned, Hedda quickly understands that he wants to be the only cock in the yard, so she is the one who cannot allow anyone to be that. And Tesman, the husband, Hedda shows disregard for Tesman's feelings. So we see that there is a sort of a tension between their relation, and we see that Tesman, like all other characters, completely unable to comprehend her dissatisfaction. So again, we see that Hedda Gabler is an intellectual, in the sense that she is completely out of one's grasp. She is completely out of one's limit of understanding. As far as Lovberg is concerned, she manipulates him, she causes him to drink, she makes him promise to shoot himself so beautifully, giving him one of her father's pistols. So she is the one who actually is writing a script for Lovberg's life, though she fails, but that dejection also causes her to commit suicide. And as far as the characters, these characters are concerned, we see that she is entrapped in a complex relationship with others, and there are three triangles mainly that form in the play. The very first one is between Hedda Gabler, George Tesman, the husband, and Lovberg, the lover, the ex-lover. So this is the first triangle that is being formed. The second one is being between Hedda Gabler, George Tesman, the husband, and okay, so sorry, here as far as the second triangle is concerned, the second triangle is between Hedda Gabler, George Tesman, and Judge Brack. Here Lovberg is written mistakenly. So the first one was between Hedda Gabler, George Tesman, and Lovberg. Second one is between Hedda Gabler, George Tesman, and Judge Brack. The third one is between Hedda Gabler, Mrs. Elstead, and Lovberg. So she is the one who is a common person, and she is the one who plays important role in all these three triangles, and that is why she is in a sort of a complex relation with all these. So summing up, we see that how the play ends, and the play obviously ends on a tragic note. She commits suicide in order to get rid of the tedium of dull life that we have already discussed, and what we call the idle rich. She finds no escape from disappointing life. Oh, what curse is it that makes everything I touch turn ludicrous and mean? So she finds no meaning in life, and she is the one who is obsessed with fear of scandal. She wants to demonstrate what a beautiful death is, shooting in the head. So the death she could not have in the form of Lovberg's shooting himself, she demonstrates it through her own death by shooting herself in the head. She seems to confirm aesthetic standards rather than moral ones. So G.B. Shaw also points out that she has no G.B. Shaw says that she has no ethical standards. She has only romantic notions. So this is, if we put Hedda Gabler in such category, probably we are more able to understand Hedda, the character of Hedda, and what causes the tragedy. So here we come to the end of our discussion. And we have seen that how Hedda Gabler as a character is important to understand if you really want to have an understanding of Ibsen's modern tragedy. And this tragedy obviously shares few points with a classical tragedy, but obviously it stands as an individual, as Raymond Williams points out. Here we come to the end of the presentation, and here the very first reference, that is the critical essays of Henrik Ibsen, is the book that I definitely would refer you for your further studies. That is all. Thank you so much.